The causes of the Ukraine war, the evolution of the crisis. Here is an explanation of how the Russian invasion of Ukraine came about and what Russia, the United States, and NATO stand to lose as a result of it. It had the atmosphere of a dangerous occurrence from the Cold War. On the border of a neighbor, an unreliable Russian leader was assembling soldiers and tanks. A deadly East-West conflagration was feared. Vladimir Putin then gave the order for Russian soldiers to invade Ukraine, escalating the Cold War. The effects were both quick and extensive. Since Russia's full-scale invasion began on February 24, there has been a significant increase in troop mobilization across Europe. Moscow has so far been unable to achieve the quick win it had hoped for and has failed to annex important cities throughout the nation, including Kyiv, the capital. A poorly equipped military has weighted it down, and Ukrainian forces and civilian resistance fighters have put up a fierce struggle against it. Nevertheless, Russia possesses greater military power, and Mr. Putin has stated that his ultimate objective is to seize Kiev, overthrow Ukraine's democratically elected government, and encircle the entire world in the Russian sphere of influence. The invasion raises severe concerns for the security system that has ruled Europe throughout the 1990s and threatens to destabilize the already unstable post-Soviet area. Mr. Putin has long bemoaned the loss of the Soviet Union's former nations, including Ukraine. He now seems to be working toward weakening NATO, the military alliance that assisted in keeping the Soviet Union in check. Russia offered a long list of requests to change that organization prior to its invasion, which NATO and the US rejected. U.S. intelligence agencies claim that as the war drags on, Mr. Putin has grown impatient with the military's slow rate of progress. As a result, Russian commanders are reportedly intensifying indiscriminate attacks on infrastructure and civilian targets as well as turning to strategies that were previously employed in the wars in Chechnya and Syria. Mariupol, Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Okturka, Hostomel, Irpin. A growing number of Ukrainian cities are now in ruins. The war has killed thousands of people and unleashed a devastating humanitarian toll. More than 3 million people have also fled Ukraine as a result of it, causing what the UN calls the fastest expanding refugee crisis since World War II. On March 16, a Russian strike in the besieged southern port city of Mariupol demolished a theater where hundreds of civilians, including children, had sought refuge. Mariupol has become a vivid symbol of the human cost of war. People have been digging trenches to handle the growing number of bodies because the city has no water or electricity. The conflict has not been resolved despite numerous diplomatic meetings between Russia and Ukraine. With some of the toughest economic penalties ever put in place against Mr. Putin's regime, the United States and the European Union have mobilized. Russia's opening to the West has been reversed as a result of hundreds of Western companies, including manufacturing, oil corporations, merchants, and fast food chains like McDonald's, suspending operations there. Here is an explanation of how the world came to be. Following the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, NATO grew eastward, eventually encompassing the majority of the European countries that had previously belonged to the Communist bloc. Along with Poland, Romania, and other nations, the Baltic republics of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia that were formerly a part of the Soviet Union joined NATO. As a result, NATO advanced to the Russian border, hundreds of miles closer to Moscow. And in 2008, it declared that it intended to enroll Ukraine at some point, though that is still viewed as a distant possibility. According to Mr. Putin, the fall of the Soviet Union was one of history's worst tragedies, depriving Russia of its due place among the world's superpowers. During his 22 years in office, he has devoted his time to strengthening Russia's military and its geopolitical influence. The possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, according to the Russian president, poses a serious threat. His criticisms of NATO have gotten louder as Russia has become more assertive and militarily powerful. Although U.S., Ukrainian, and NATO officials stress there are no American ballistic missiles or combat soldiers in Ukraine, he has repeatedly referenced their existence. Mr. Putin has also insisted that Ukraine is fundamentally parts of Russia, culturally and historically. East-West relations worsened drastically in early 2014, when mass protests in Ukraine forced out a president closely allied with Mr. Putin. Russia swiftly invaded and annexed Crimea, part of Ukraine. Moscow also fomented a separatist rebellion that took control of part of the Donbas region of Ukraine, in a war that still grinds on, having killed more than 13,000 people. What does Putin want? By creating a vast, Russian-dominated security zone that resembles the authority Moscow held during the Soviet era, Mr. Putin appears determined to turn back the hands of time by more than 30 years. He definitely wants to bring 44 million strong Ukraine back under Russian control at the age of 69, possibly in the last stages of his political career. In December, Russia issued written demands to NATO and the US that it claimed were necessary to safeguard its security. The three main ones are a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, a reduction in NATO's presence in the member states of Eastern Europe, and the implementation of the 2015 ceasefire in Ukraine, albeit Moscow and Kyiv have drastically divergent views on what that would entail. The Western world outright rejected the main requests. Moscow's strong stance has also heightened nationalism in Ukraine, where citizen groups are prepared for a protracted guerrilla fight should Russia invade. The Russian president might also try to use an external threat, as he has in the past, to energize nationalists at home. Nevertheless, thousands of Russians have protested the war in the streets since the invasion started, some doing so at great personal danger. How is the United States responding? Since Ukraine is not a member of NATO and is not subject to its obligation to collective defense, among other factors, President Biden made it clear in early December that his administration was not considering deploying soldiers to fight for Ukraine. Instead, the US has strengthened its military posture in NATO nations that border Russia, deployed anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons to Ukraine, and requested the deployment of an extra 7,000 troops to Europe. To reassure uneasy NATO allies in Eastern Europe, the Pentagon has approved the deployment of an armored brigade combat team to Germany. Officials from the administration also issued a warning that the US would support an uprising in Ukraine. But money is the true issue. Mr. Biden, pledging to make Mr. Putin a pariah, has announced severe sanctions intended to cut off Russia's biggest banks and some oligarchs from a significant portion of the global financial system and prevent the nation from importing American technology essential to its defense, aerospace, and maritime industries. Additionally, Mr. Biden has imposed sanctions on the business in charge of an energy pipeline that runs from Russia to Germany and barred energy imports from Russia to the United States. According to Mr. Biden, the United States has frozen trillions of dollars worth of Russian assets, including money that Russian officials and their families control. Although Mr. Putin's assets have been promised to be frozen by Western countries as well, it is unclear exactly what he owns and where it may be. Additionally, the Biden administration may impose sanctions that would deny Russians access to their cherished new smartphones, computers, and other technology. Financial sanctions and limitations imposed by the United States and Europe are crippling Russian banks and other businesses, restricting the use of the country's vast foreign exchange reserves, and preventing millions of Russians from using credit cards, accessing their bank accounts, or traveling abroad. What's at stake for Europe? Europeans were originally divided about how to respond to various types of Russian aggression, and the war exposed the cracks within the European Union and NATO. What is at stake for Europe is the security framework that has assisted in maintaining the peace on the continent since World War II. But the EU and the EU's fury over Mr. Putin's aggression have contributed to a unified front. Outlined penalties that they said were unprecedented in scope and breadth for the bloc. Wealthy people and companies aligned with the Kremlin have had their overseas assets frozen. Europe, which has significant trade ties with Russia, stands to suffer much more from sanctions than the United States. It also depends on Russian gas imports, which Mr. Putin has abused in previous conflicts. After the resignation of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was born in the East, is fluent in Russian, and had cultivated a positive working relationship with the Russian president, Europe lost a crucial mediator with Moscow. Olaf Scholz, her successor, has attempted to assume a leadership position in the situation by blocking approval of the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline that would connect his nation with Russia. This is one of the biggest sanctions the West has yet to enact against the Kremlin. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you have something to say, please leave a comment. See you at the next video.